Before we go on to our next reader, I would like to read a poem that I published in the Más Tequila Review, issue number 5. And it did appear in my last book, Guernica Revisited. And it's for someone who was a big influence on me becoming a writer. And he never got to hear this poem. It's called Salvation for Ray Bradbury. I was in the 3rd grade, spending the weekend at my Nana's when I found my uncle's old Playboy magazine laying on his bed in plain sight. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. I knew it was supposed to be a big deal from the way grown-ups talked about it, but I have to tell you, I wasn't impressed, although I now had a pretty good idea why ladies were so soft in certain places. The cartoons were interesting, but they weren't funny to me. And just as I was going to put it down, I came across an illustration of a T-Rex. And since I was all about dinosaurs, I started reading the text, which turned out to be a story about men paying money to travel back in time so they could hunt the biggest, baddest meat eater ever to roam the planet. And when T-Rex showed up, some guy got scared and ran off, stepping where he wasn't supposed to, squashing a bug, which totally changed evolution. The story struck me like lightning and my blood began to boil between my ears. I started looking for anything the author had written, finding his books at the local library as his words and stories eased the pain of growing up with a father who I thought loved the needle in his arm more than me. The next year, my old man OD'd, and I sought comfort in the pages of those books, looking for something to step on, a bug to squash, and turn back the clock so I could start over with my not so happy 10-year-old life. Then I started to write stories, diving deeper into the sea of words and language until I couldn't come up for air. And that led to my first poems. Now, 48 years later, I'm still at it. And Ray, you magnificent storytelling SOB, it's just me apologizing for how long it's taken to say thanks. And as I recall, Alexis published this in Cultural Weekly, which is now Cultural Daily. And we'll get to that in a little bit here. But thank you for that. Our next reader is someone who, no matter how much of a bio I had to give you about him, it wouldn't be nearly enough. He's had a fantastic life. I urge you, if you're not familiar with the work of Edward Field, to check him out. And just on a personal level, we've only met once back in the 1970s, but he's been a friend, a mentor, and someone who's always been there to support me and give me advice. And as poets, we really treasure those people in our lives. And I'm so lucky to have Edward Field in my corner. Edward appeared in issues 1, 3, and 7 of the Más Tequila Review. He's currently 97 and author of a dozen books of poetry, fiction, and memoirs. And he started writing poetry during World War II when, as a navigator, he flew 27 bombing missions. A poem about his plane crashing has been made into a short film called A Minor Accident of War and has won multiple prizes on the film festival circuit. Some of his achievements, and this is just a very short list, and awards include the Lamont Poetry Prize from the Academy of American Poets in 1962, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1963, and a Lambda Literary Award in 1993. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the great Edward Field.
Thank you, Richard. I did spend most of my life after I got published giving readings around the country. And Richard, I think that's how I got to Long Beach State and met you. It was really a very good way of earning a living because I never knew how. I never had an academic degree and could never teach or anything like that. The winners and the losers. I stood before them and told them of my life, the sorrows and the losses. In short, the human condition. I could see them all so young, hair shiny, with their lives before them. They were looking on me as a loser and had no pity. So determined were they to make it big, to be winners. Even the clerk in the Social Security office looked at me with wonder and asked, "Have you always earned so little?" I had never thought of it that way. To her too, I was a loser with bad luck written all over my tax records. What happened to the beautiful losers of my youth who let the world destroy them but stayed true to their dream? Scoffed at materialism, conventions, a small beleaguered band who kept their integrity against the world and devoted their lives to art, sex, and revolution. Youth once believed in them, the madmen who burned themselves out with drugs and drink, disappeared into the desert, or battered society with their shaggy heads. There was one period even when everybody was rushing off in search of the underground man. But now that winners are in fashion, disappearing are the last of the bohemians left over from the old days of the village. And I am of another era, like the grizzled poet who slept in village doorways and showed up at the Poetry Society with his life work in a shopping bag and read his poem, Crows. "Caw, caw," he cried, as he jumped off a table, flapping his arms. Thank you. I did go through a lot of psychotherapy in the 50s. After the war, it was very difficult to see how I could live as a poet. But then I had a revelation, and I named my first book after from a line with a line from the poem that liberated me. I never published that poem, and I've never read it in public, I think. But I did write another poem that told the story in a different way, called A Journey. When he got up that morning, everything was different. He enjoyed the bright spring day, but he did not realize it exactly. He just enjoyed it. And walking down the street to the railroad station, past magnolia trees with dying flowers like old socks. It was a long time since he had breathed so simply. Tears filled his eyes, and it felt good, but he held them back because men didn't walk around crying in that town. And waiting on the platform at the station, the fear came over him of something terrible about to happen. The train was late, and he recited the alphabet to keep hold. And in its time, it came screeching in. And as it went on making its usual stops, people coming and going, telephone poles passing, he hid his head behind the newspaper, no longer able to hold back the sobs, and willed his eyes to follow the rational weavings of the seat fabric. He didn't do anything violent as he had imagined. He cried for a long time, but when he finally quieted down, a place in him that had been closed like a fist was open. And at the end of the ride, he stood up and got off that train. And through the streets and in all the places he lived in later on, he walked himself at last, a man among men, with such radiance that everyone looked up and wondered. It's been published as a chapbook by my friend and literary executor, Robert Netzer, who has just joined, I see. Do I have time more? I forgot, Richard, I forgot to check the clock.
Sure, one more.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
I was with my partner for 58 years. And when you live that long with someone, your relationship falls into a pattern. And I've written a series of poems talking about the patterns of relationships. The main one in my relationship was nurses and patients. If we divide the world into nurses and patients, I am a born nurse and you a born patient. I am in a passion of taking care of you, and you demand constant, unremitting attention. We found each other. Your ailments increase in scope and complexity as I struggle to keep you well, finding cures, solutions to your problems. Your needs are a mountain and I am an ant, moving it grain by grain. I daren't stop for a moment. How to keep you alive, my darling, when life seems to have cheated you, rewarding you only with troubles galore. In your view, that is somehow all my fault. I am supposed to make it up to you, for you see me as one of the lucky ones who have been given everything in life: looks, lovers, success, and luck. My luck angel is only to have found you, the large, demanding child I adore, the child of the world I worship, the child of myself I care for, my sweet pain. The more I give, the more you demand. I can never do enough, I know. Failure, failure. Still, I am grateful to have found a way to be useful in life. Thank you. Thank you for that supreme gift. To me, you are a radiant being I am honored to serve. Nurse has found the perfect patient, patient the perfect nurse, and care will be unrelenting. Both parties agree there will be no cure. Thank you.
Oh, Edward, thank you for that. It was great to hear you read and join us. I feel very lucky today. And, thanks for coming all the way from the village to join us.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. I love the magazine. I love your work.
Thank you very much.
You post your poems on Facebook, and I'm always reading them.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you, sir.